It's the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. On Wednesday, Donald Trump held a press conference. He dealt with many issues, but one very important among them is what he plans to do with his business empire. Let's take a brief look at what he and his lawyer, Sherry Dillon, had to say.
But I have a no conflict of interest provision as president. It was many, many years old. This is for presidents because they don't want presidents getting, I understand, they don't want presidents getting tangled up in minutiae. They want a president to run the country. So I could actually run my business. I could actually run my business and run government at the same time. I don't like the way that looks, but I would be able to do that if I wanted to. I'd be the only one that would be able to do that. You can't do that in any other capacity. But as a president, I could run the Trump Organization, great company, and I could run the company, the country. I do a very good job, but I don't want to do that. What I'm going to be doing is my two sons, who are right here, Don and Eric, are going to be running the company. They are going to be running it in a very professional manner. They're not going to discuss it with me. Again, I don't have to do this. They're not going to discuss it with me. And with that, I'm going to bring up Sherry Dillon, and she's going to go, these papers are just some of the many documents that I've signed, turning over complete and total control to my son.
As he said, he's voluntarily taking this on. The conflicts of interest laws simply do not apply to the president or the vice president, and they are not required to separate themselves from their financial assets. Even so, President-elect Trump wants there to be no doubt in the minds of the American public that he is completely isolating himself from his business interests. He instructed us to take all steps realistically possible to make it clear that he is not exploiting the office of the presidency for his. First, President-elect Trump's investments in business assets, commonly known as the Trump Organization, comprising hundreds of entities, which again, if you all go and take a look at his financial disclosure statement, the pages and pages and pages of entities have all been or will be conveyed to a trust prior to January 20th.
The president-elect is separating himself from his business empire by apparently transferring assets into a trust and putting his two sons, Eric and Don, in charge of it all. So then the question remains, will the trust deal with his conflict of interest that he is all tangled up in? Joining us today to examine this is Bill Black. Bill is a white-collar criminologist and former financial regulator. He's the author of The Best Way to Rob a Bank is to Own One. He's also a regular contributor here at the Real News Network. Bill, welcome back.
Thank you.
So, Bill, let's start with what Trump plans to do with his business empire and whether it actually deals with the problem.
So he has three obvious problems in terms of the business. One is continuing this kind of business ownership violates the Constitution. The second is that it creates immense conflicts of interest. And the third is that running the presidency of the United States is supposed to be more than a full-time business. And it's clear that Trump is really far more interested in doing business deals than the business of the nation. And no, this doesn't solve any of these three problems. Doesn't solve the constitutional problem because he is going to be taking money, perhaps vast amounts of money, from foreign governments in his business entities. It doesn't solve the conflict of interest because it's not a true blind trust at all. And even in a supposed blind trust, he would obviously know what his assets were, unless he divested, which is what he's refusing to do. So there's
Bill,
nothing blind about trust.
Bill, let's unpack that for a moment. Now, yesterday in the press conference, he said that one way he plans to deal with this issue is to any funds that his hotels receives from the foreign governments by way of, say, holding events. For example, one of the things that have been cited is if, let's say, the government of Saudi Arabia wants to hold an event in Washington, and they use the Trump hotel in Washington to hold that event, he would then take that income and give it to the public treasury. Now, how feasible is all that, and how do we track any of that, and what do you think of his measure of allowing this to go to the public treasury?
Well, first, again, we don't know how any of this would be done, and he is someone who is the opposite of transparent. The only person in modern times who has refused to release his tax returns.
Well, not releasing tax returns because, as you know, they're under audit.
But every president since the 70s has had a required audit from the IRS. The last 6 have released him. But as president, sir, is
you know, the only
taking
one that
office.
cares about my tax returns are the reporters. Okay?
You don't think the American public is concerned about
No, I
that?
don't think so. I won.
Under this completely bogus explanation that he's under audit, as if that meant he couldn't release his tax returns. With my law hat on, there's absolutely no such clause. In terms of the governments, they have every incentive to curry interest with Trump. It's abundantly apparent that Trump cares enormous amounts of money, about having money. And of course, they wouldn't have to do it in the name of the Saudi government. They could do it in the name of any of literally over 1,000 Saudi princes and such, or their supposed charitable funds, or their lobbyists could do it. So no, none of this does anything other than cause you to use a cutout. And the Saudis are expert at using cutouts. Nothing unique about the Saudis. Everybody understands how to do this to curry favor and to appear to comply with some laws. So again, that's why the head of the Office of Government Ethics. Now, people may recall that there's a Congressional ethics, and that the very first act, literally, of the Republicans upon constituting the new Congress was to try to take a whack at those folks. And that lasted one day before public opinion caused them to back off. But there's an Office of Government Ethics more generally, and this is not, a particularly stringent type entity, but back in the past, for example, they made criminal referrals when Charles Keating was trying to put a mole. Charles Keating was the most infamous fraud of the savings and loan debacle, and through the Reagan administration, you got a presidential appointee who was, literally, as intelligence agents used the term, a mole for this leading fraud running the agency. The Office of Government Ethics, once I blew the whistle to them, was instrumental in getting Lee Henkel, that mole, to resign in disgrace. So, they have their moments. Well, the head of the Office of Government Ethics just came out flat out and said, this is outrageous. You should not do this. Divestment is the only effort that can work. And, the claim that it's a sacrifice, everybody else to serve in the federal government, including, of course, all the people in the armed services, make vastly greater sacrifices than this. So he just took a hammer and hit it right in Donald Trump's forehead, figuratively, on this issue. And then the former head of ethics for the Bush administration, Richard Painter, who, in disclosure, is a colleague of my wife on the faculty of the U Minnesota Law School, has been increasingly clear that this just flatly violates the Constitution, and of course is a terrible act in terms of conflicts of interest that you're supposed to avoid. Let's be clear, the framers of the Constitution the U.S. Constitution is blessedly short. So there aren't that many specific, you can't do this is in it. And one of the things they explicitly put in, because of real world experience, was we're going to make sure the President of the United States cannot be influenced by foreign governments through these means. We have this prohibition, and it is just a flat prohibition. So Trump's lawyers are absolutely wrong in saying, well, if you just do business in the normal course, as the Saudis or the Russians with the Trump empire, that can't be a problem. No, that's forbidden.
Wow. So what do you make of the type of trust that's been established? Now, there's been a lot of talk about whether it's a blind trust or just a trust. I think he was proposing just establish a trust that he would just hand over to Don and Eric to run. Does it matter what kind of trust?
Yes, if you did real divestment, you wouldn't then know what you owned in a blind trust. And there would be less concern that you were doing things as a president that might make you rich. If it's not a blind trust, you know what your assets are intimately. You know exactly what will help those assets in terms of policies and in lobbyists and friends and foreign parties like we've been talking about. And it brings government into disrepute. So he could have created a blind trust. It would have required divestment. He's absolutely refused to do what all presidents have done in the modern era. He's flatly refused to follow the advice of the Office of Government Ethics. He's flatly refused to follow the advice of people where this is their specialty area, the ethics and finances of the government. He has created blatant conflicts of interest, and he's made it farcical by putting his two sons. So, this isn't the Ford Foundation running something. This is his kids. And, he even said at the end of the conference, well, what would you do if these kids did a bad job of running it? He said, I'd fire them. So he's retaining control. So it's a farce, and it's an outrage, and it's unconstitutional. It needs to be stopped. And as I said, on top of that, he has a more than full-time job trying to learn to be president of the United States. The last thing in the world someone as lazy as Donald Trump is, who can't be bothered to read a memo because it interferes with his ability to be touting his towers, someone who constantly takes the press to do photo opportunities as his own businesses to make himself richer. He is the last person in the world that needs these conflicts of interest and these distractions. So on all three grounds, it simply should be completely unacceptable.
And Bill, you travel these circles. Some of your colleagues, you've mentioned others. Many people are talking about this big, huge elephant in the room that he keeps trying to deflect as a non-issue. In fact, at the beginning of the conference, he says, I'm not required by law to do any of this. But you're a lawyer. What are people saying about it? When you say this is constitutional conflict here, why isn't that registering with Donald Trump?
Because he could care less about these kinds of things. He's a rich guy born not with a silver spoon but with a platinum spoon, and then when he screwed that up, he got another serving from Dad. All his life he's been able to skate. All his life he's been made rich by the government. David K. Johnston's book can explain this to you in great detail, how he was bailed out twice by the federal and then the state government combination through his taxes. he has contempt for all normal rules. It's of a piece with his refusal to disclose his tax returns, and he's flat out wrong on the constitutional part. That is a law, and he's going to take an oath to defend and protect the very Constitution that he's going to start out massively violating. Now, he is correct that in addition to the Constitution, there is something that isn't a legal mandate. It is simply what all modern presidents have done in the view that it is essential to the dignity of the office, to respect for the office, that Americans should know that there aren't conflicts of interest. And Donald Trump is saying, screw you on that. Now, that isn't a law, that second part. Nor is it a law that says, hey, you've got more than a full-time job being president. But anyone responsible would not do what he's doing. Now, of course, no surprise to us that he's going to act irresponsibly, but he needs to be hammered when he does these kind of things. We cannot simply accept this progressive destruction of ethics as being inevitable.
Bill, there's some rumors on the Hill that some Congress people are possibly calling for an inquiry into the direct conflicts that are going on. Are there any legal course that Congress or anyone else could take in terms of these, obvious cases of conflict of interest you're talking about?
Oh, certainly. Congress can hold hearings. Congress can have the GAO investigate. But only the majority party can call hearings, subpoena witnesses, subpoena documents. And it would be extraordinary. I mean, it would be a good thing, but no one expects that's going to be done by any Republican chair anytime remotely soon. Individual members of Congress can ask the GAO to investigate, but when the GAO, for example, sought to investigate, remember when Dick Cheney was vice president and he had his secret energy commission that was overwhelmingly top executives, like of Exxon, secretly making our policy, and the GAO sought to investigate. Well, there was even a court case, and then the GAO gave up that court case, and the reason is it was threatened with massive reduction in its budget should it take on the president in those kinds of actions, and the vice president, Dick Cheney. And of course, the absolute most influential group of that secret group of energy companies with Dick Cheney, that was Enron.
Right, and obviously there's a similar conflicts going on. As the hearings unfold, we are coming to know that Tillerson and a number of other appointees that are getting confirmed as we speak has similar conflicts of interest, and then there's no possibility of Congress or Senate putting any of these concerns into any sort of inquiry going on. It's a done deal, it seems.
And there's simply no candor. So he testified in his confirmation hearing that Exxon, to his knowledge, had not directly lobbied to try to get out of the Russian sanctions. In fact, it lobbied extensively. And then he said, when he was confronted with the evidence that they'd lobbied, well, how do you know we lobbied against the sanctions that cost us tens of billions of dollars? It's just, they're not even trying to create a good cover-up. It's just we can get away with anything.
Right. And why do you think the Democrats are going along with it? I mean, they're asking the most lame questions in these hearings one could imagine. The odd congressman or senator is asking some tough questions, but it's rare.
Yes, so Marco Rubio was by far the toughest questioner in any of the hearings. The Will Rogers, I think, said it best now, maybe 80 years ago. I'm not a member of any organized party. I'm a Democrat.
All right, Bill, I thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.